Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. I am absolutely thrilled to be able to kick off our Fair Chance Hiring webinar with our esteemed panelists. Um, and I'm Steph Dolan. I'm a program director at the Corporate Coalition of Chicago. The Corporate Coalition is an alliance of companies working to align their hiring, procurement, and investment efforts and strategies with the goal of reducing racial and economic inequity in Chicago. I lead our Fair Chance Hiring Initiative, which runs a cohort program for employers who have said that hiring fair chance talent is a priority of theirs. I do this in partnership with Cara Plus and the Chicagoland Workforce Funder Alliance, and we work with these employers to help them adjust their HR practices and do broader organizational changes as well to more effectively hire, retain, and advance fair chance talent within their organizations. During our panel today, we're going to talk about the ways in which companies are engaging in fair chance hiring. As many of you know, 1 in 3 working age Americans has a record, which poses a very significant barrier to employment. This group of talent is really a source of untapped talent, especially in the time of tight labor markets. And companies are beginning to take important steps to open up opportunities and change their practices that have historically and unnecessarily excluded people with these skills and talents that employers so need. During the next hour, we'll have a conversation with our panelists about what they're seeing on a local level in Chicago, as well as on a national level. And I think this is particularly exciting because we have a number of viewpoints represented. We have CARA, a workforce organization in Chicago. We have JP Morgan Chase and Advocate Health from the employer perspective. And then Nan is actually wearing 2 hats today, representing also the Second Chance Business Coalition. So with that, I wanted to do more formal introductions. We are joined today by Bridget Borum, just going in alphabetical order here. Bridget Borum of Advocate Health, Liana Braun of Cara Plus, Nan Gibson of JP Morgan Chase and the Second Chance Business Coalition, and Matt Premack, CEO of Advocate Condell Medical Center. So with that, we're going to dive into our conversation. We'll open it up for questions around 12:45. So in the meantime, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll have folks kind of consolidating those questions, and then we'll open it up for more discussion then. So with that, Nan, you get my first question. Today, 10% of JP Morgan Chase's new hires have records. And that's a huge number given the size of JP Morgan Chase. Briefly, can you tell us how JP Morgan Chase got started with this work and what some of the most significant things were that you had to do to be able to reach these numbers?
Yeah, well, thanks, Steph, for the question. And thank you all, my fellow panelists and all of the folks who have joined the webinar today. We really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about this topic. And in terms of, JP Morgan Chase, actually, our origin story starts in Chicago. So it's quite fitting that we're doing this particular webinar, with the Corporate Coalition of Chicago. And there's actually a New York Times piece that Jamie wrote back in 2021 where he talks about the fact that he went to visit the North Lawndale Employment Center, and where they were training individuals who were formerly incarcerated to help them get jobs at the Chicago Transit Authority. And he was after hearing the stories of the individuals and how going through that training program and getting well-paying jobs with good benefits and career pathways changed their lives, he came back to the office and he said, we need to be more intentional about how we can bring on people who have criminal records within our regulatory framework. So that's a little bit of how we got on this journey of being intentional about hiring folks with records. And I know we'll get into a lot of the details to come, but we take a very holistic approach to this. So there's our hiring practices that we focus on. We make investments in community organizations like CARA, North Lawndale, Legal Services Partners. We developed a community hiring model, which I can go into in more detail in a little bit, where we work with our community partners to explain to them how our regulatory framework works. We hold expungement clinics with our pro bono legal team and our community branches and with some of our community partners. And then there's my day job, which is actually we work on public policy because while we want to bring businesses together like we do in the Second Chance Business Coalition, to share best practices, we also know that public policy is the most enduring way to help make change. So that's kind of a broad brush of how we got on this path. And I know we want to dive into a couple more of those topics that I've raised.
Great, thanks, Nan. Matt, I'm going to throw a similar question to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how Advocate Health got started with fair chance hiring and what practices did you all have to reconsider?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. And Nan, what a great opening. Love that. Number one, thank you for all attending this afternoon. We are all so busy these days, so to set time aside for such an important topic is really appreciative. And the fellow panelists, it's great to be with you. And I think one other plug is Steph and Holly, the team at the Corporate Coalition just have done a phenomenal job. Thanks to you all at the Coalition, as well as Brian Fabes, who leads this. So thank you to all for really bringing this to light. We started this in Advocate many years ago, and I would say not as successful as we would have liked. Back around 2015, 2016, some of us got together and said, hey, we have this idea. What do we think? And we sort of tested this with some folks in the community. We ended up getting in touch with Emerson Collective, if those remember that organization, and Arnie Duncan was hard at work in those early days. But what we didn't have internally was really an understanding of how we were going to build this, how we were going to launch this, what it was going to look like. And in addition, we had a bit of a philosophical disconnect in the executive team of the organization. How do we do it safely? Where do we put these folks? What does the hiring look like? What are our policies look like? And at the time, unlike today, healthcare wasn't going through a major shortage of workforce. We put out an ad and people applied, and we had tons of resumes, and so we didn't at that time have sort of a burning platform, or so we thought. And then things evolved, and we actually really moved as an entire enterprise more deeply into our DE&I movement and our mission and spiritual care. And those leaders came in and said, look, we need to not only think about what we're doing inside of the four walls of our organization, but think about how we're supporting communities outside of the organization. And in our world, not just people who need care, but people who need wellness and support. And this was a population that came up. And so we gathered around probably 2018, 19, so several years later, and said, look, this is real. This is happening, and we need to get on the bandwagon quick. We're one of the largest providers, one of the largest providers of healthcare, one of the largest employers in the state of Illinois. We need to be at this game. So step one, we needed to get risk and HR on board. And I'm not, if anybody in the audience today is from risk or HR, just know these were long conversations. And how do we get there? And how do we get comfortable with the idea of bringing this type of workforce in? But we got there. And so we decided as an enterprise we were going to move in this direction. And then we realized quickly it couldn't just be a hiring practice. It really needed to be a program. And it couldn't just be, yes, we're going to allow it, but we're going to build it. We're going to put somebody in charge of it. We're going to build parameters and policies around it. And that's where we come to our amazing angel of Bridget Borum, who we're so blessed to have on the call today, who's able to go very deep into what this whole program is at Advocate Health.
Thanks, Matt. Bridget, I'm handing the baton over to you. I think we would love to hear a little bit more about how you operationalize this, brought it to life. And I know that you were part of our Fair Chance hiring cohort last year. So we'd just love to hear a little bit about what you worked on and where you might be taking this next.
So as we've as taken over from Matt, who's a great storyteller, right? So I'm gonna try and carry the torch, Matt. But taking it forward, we began to look at what had been our hiring practices internally. And we as a healthcare provider are required to do a criminal background check for all employees, right? And so we began to evaluate, had there been opportunities where we hired folks who had criminal backgrounds, and we recognized that there were patterns, there were trends, and that this was something that we were doing once we took an individual evaluation of the offense, compared it to the role that the person would have within the organization, and then also compared that offense to the caregiver legislation for both states, and in Illinois, the Illinois Department of Public Health legislation, to make sure that we were appropriately aligned. And so that's how we evaluated our talent. But we did put together a team, and it was a pretty large team, and Matt touched on that as well. There were folks from risk and compliance, there were folks on the team from workforce development. There was also folks on the team from our HR business partner representation. And we created an ecosystem in the beginning for our talent, so that as we did interview and source that talent, then we also provided those support services for the talent so that they could experience success once they join the organization. We did do a quiet launch. So this was something that happened within TA. We worked with the hiring leaders where the talent would be hired into to work against bias for a particular population, but we did not reveal any offense or that a person had a criminal background. They participate in a competitive process along with all other self-select talent for the organization. And then they were just offered that additional support service once they were hired in at their own merit. And so that's where we started. The program has certainly had lots of traction within the organization. It's active in Wisconsin and in Illinois. And now that we've integrated with another system in the Southeast, and they take a different kind of approach to fair chance hiring, we are looking to scale across our entire footprint so that we can have fair chance candidates in all of our sites and clinics.
That's really exciting. And I love hearing about how it got, its very early start in 2015, 2016, 2017, like with Matt, and then really how you guys were able to operationalize it and then not just bring it to life, but bring it to life across multiple states now and continue to try to grow this. So thank you for your work and congratulations on that. I want to turn us a little bit to a topic that Nan brought up, and Bridget did too, actually, around regulations. So we know that financial institutions and healthcare organizations are highly regulated. As employers think about pursuing fair chance hiring, one of the concerns we frequently hear is we're regulated. We have to abide by a series of regulations, and we aren't able. How do we work within those? How do we work around them? So wanted to turn it first to Nan, and then to Matt. How did JP Morgan Chase, how did Advocate tackle those regulatory barriers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I should say that our, we are also highly regulated, like Advocate is, and for good reason, right? We want to make sure that that the financial system remains safe and sound. So we do have to follow, the regulatory guidelines around hiring. But what we noticed is that we're a skills first employer. we're hiring people based on, you know, that we want to make sure that they're usually by the time they get to that, when they get to that offer of employment, we're pretty sure we found the right person for that job. We're a ban the box employer, so and we do individualized assessments, very similar to Advocate. But what we were seeing was, you know, friction in the system where someone might get to the end of that process and then find out there was something that would, you know, they would need an FDIC waiver for. And so that was a suboptimal experience, let's just say, for both the candidate and for the hiring manager. That's when we developed, you know, similar, it sounds like, to Advocate, these community hiring, you know, models where we were working to educate our talent pipeline providers on some of the hiring rules for the industry. And then also, we were going back and having a dialogue with our regulators at the FDIC to explain to them like how many people were being left on the sidelines because of an old record or something that wasn't relevant to making sure that the financial system remained safe and sound. And so once we began that dialogue with the FDIC, we made, you know, great progress on a number of issues. And then we got to a certain point where we actually needed to go to Congress to have them change a few rules, work with them to pass the Fair Hiring and Banking Act back in 2022, which basically one of the most important things that that piece of legislation did was just establish a look back period. So before that, if someone, you know, had some type of record, they, except for a few crimes, they would have to go get a waiver from the FDIC, and that was just not, you know, a practical experience from the job seeker's point of view or from an employer's point of view in the financial services industry. So we actually took a two-prong approach. One, like working to educate, you know, the talent providers that we work with on what some of the rules are that were being faced, and then also working with our regulators to just explain to them how the rules were working, you know, practically speaking. And we were lucky that we were able to, I don't know if lucky is the right word, but anyway, we were fortunate that we were able to, you know, work with our regulators on and with Congress on some sensible reforms to hiring, and we have seen a meaningful difference in you know, in those changes that we've been able to bring additional people on. In fact, I love to tell the story that there was actually someone who was in, you know, we were doing a background check on them, and they were in the queue when the Fair Hiring and Banking Act legislation was passed and sorry, was signed by the president. And literally, with the stroke of a pen, we were able to hire someone that we wanted to hire because of the change in the legislation. So that just tells you how important it is both to like work with your partners and also try to establish, you know, a dialogue with your regulators as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and just to reinforce the importance of that Fair Hiring and Banking Act, one of our cohort members last year is also in the financial services industry. And they said the passage of that act really helped them transform their ability to hire fair chance talent. And it helped them open the doors so much more broadly to this talent pool, which selfishly, as Leon and I were running the cohort, that made our jobs like so much more interesting and impactful. Matt, Bridget, I would love to hear sort of your take on the approach to regulations. I know IDPH guidelines in Illinois can prohibit individuals with records or with certain records from taking on certain roles. So I'd love to hear about sort of how you thought about that as you were building out your Fair Chance program.
Bridget, why don't you kick off? I'll fill in anything else.
Okay, thanks. And so for us, we partner very closely with our partner CARE, and they actually review criminal background with the candidates prior to providing them or presenting them for roles within the organization. And then once they complete the competitive process for employment, then they go through the traditional process of the criminal background check. And we have an internal criminal background check team. And when something appears on a person's record, that individual offense or is evaluated individually, right? And so as Nan had said, sometimes offenses are old and no longer relevant. Sometimes they are applied for certain roles within the hospital and not other roles. And so all of the offenses are evaluated individually by our criminal background check team. And then they're compared to those two pieces of legislation, caregiver legislation and Illinois Department of Public Health. And that's a step that's completed for every candidate who is extended an offer for employment within our system. And so that's just how we do business. I heard you say, how do you get around the legislation? We don't, we go right through it.
Maybe it's work within.
Yes, we go right within the legislation. And should there be something that's on the background that prohibits a person from working in the system, we would have that conversation and rescind the offer. But we also have the opportunity to look at the offense and say, maybe a different role would be more appropriate given the offense, and we could leverage that talent in another way. And so we'd have them interview in another role where that offense would not be a violation of any of the legislation. And so we take great care with that. Generally, we have not had many occurrences where we get to the offer stage and have to rescind when they're coming from places like Kara, because they're familiar with their background, they're familiar with the legislation. And so there's a prior knowledge of what to anticipate when they get to the offer step.
I just
you.
piggyback on that point for 1 second. It works that way, where you try to make sure that the partner is informed about like what's in scope, what's out of scope. I think the other important point that sometimes gets lost is when we do work with our partners and we educate them about the rules. Sometimes people have been self-selecting out of these types of roles because they think that maybe there's something in their background that would preclude them from working at a bank or working in healthcare. And then what our partners are able to do is help people understand, like, oh, open up their mind. Oh, maybe I could have a career in the banking industry. Maybe what's in my past doesn't preclude me from that. So it actually works both ways. Is that sometimes, it opens them up to a career pathway that they hadn't really thought about before.
Yes, Steph, I want to jump in. So, Bridget, such a great summary and analysis, sort of showcasing how we've thought through regulatory, because I mean, banking, healthcare, so many of our industries are so highly regulated. And in healthcare, we're dealing with patient care, we're dealing with protected health information, we're dealing with pharmaceuticals sitting on countertops, but managed and protected. But I mean, there's a high chance and a high opportunity for error and issues. So the regulatory side of healthcare is appropriately very, very tough to navigate at times. Just a few other things that I want to point out more from an industry standpoint is we are now facing in healthcare a pretty significant labor shortage. And this labor shortage is often on the non-clinical frontline teammate side. So whether it's environmental services, food services, because for the first time really ever in our industry, we're now competing for workforce with non-healthcare entities. So somebody who would potentially choose a career in a hospital in environmental services could potentially have a very similar role in a hotel, but oh, by the way, not have a risk of being in an environment of a deadly disease. So we are starting to compete from a workforce standpoint. And so the industry has gotten a lot more strategic and thoughtful around generating additional workforce opportunities to load into healthcare. So not only at the Illinois state level through whether it's the IHA, Illinois Hospital Association, or the Illinois Department of Health, but also at the national level. There's a lot of discussion around fair chance hiring into healthcare. And I think that momentum is very positive. And it's also suggestive that whether there are legislative issues around or upcoming around fair chance hiring, that will be likely addressed positively in the next several years.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that additional like clarification and context is really important and also very optimistic, right? Like that is exciting to hear, especially as I think about this year's cohort. Three of our cohort members are healthcare systems in Illinois, right? And so that means there could be really great opportunity looking ahead. I want to turn us to Liana. We've talked a lot about the importance that workforce partners can play in helping to recruit, prepare, and support fair chance talent. So Liana, I know that Kara has worked with justice impacted individuals for a long time now, and that you have very close relationships with many employer partners, including Advocate. So what are some of the ingredients for a successful relationship with an employer?
Thanks, Steph. And I have to just recognize it is incredible to be in this space with two employers that are not only what I consider fair chance champions or leading the way for so many other employers, but also incredible partners in the community. And so I think my argument is that those things are intimately connected. To be a fair chance employer, we know, we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, so many Americans are impacted by the justice system. So you're going to be touching candidates that have a background, and you can work very strategically with community organizations to intentionally tap into that talent pool. And for me at Kara, I get to work with our employment partners quite closely in the cohort. I get to see this experience of what are employers doing that makes them successful with community partners. So what I see and what I identify is the employers that are doing this well are quite intentional about who they're partnering with and how. So I think that begins with them understanding what are their goals. If they're trying to tap into a new talent pool, let's just start there. What are the community organizations that are going to help you reach those individuals? And then taking the time to actually get to know those partners, because I think that is such a critical step in this process. Yes, we encourage employers, if you have existing relationships with community organizations, that's a great place to start. But begin to peel back the layers to understand, who do those community partners engage? How do they prepare those individuals for jobs? And then go and match them with employers or not. What does that process look like? And then I think maybe one of the biggest steps that is often maybe overlooked in that process is so many people are focused on hiring. Okay, do you have the people that we need to connect with? Do you have the numbers of people we need to connect with? And sometimes we forget about retention. It's not enough to just think about a job placement or a hire as success, particularly with fair chance talent. You need to anticipate what are the kinds of supports that those individuals are going to need to be successful once they're on the job. So getting to know your partners and understanding what wraparound supports, what resources can they provide once someone is on the job, that's going to be such a big part of the equation. So when it comes specifically to a partner like Advocate, I just want to spend a moment there in terms of what has made that partnership successful. To give you some context, at this point, we've worked with Advocate to create over 80 opportunities for our talent pool at Kara. That is so meaningful. You're one of our top hiring partners. And I think what has led to that outcome is it's a relationship. When we work with Bridget, we see her as a partner in this work. So that means we're constantly communicating with Bridget and the team, both on an individual candidate level, and we're having those conversations about what are the guidelines, what are the restrictions around the background check process, which we know play a role in the healthcare space, and then how do we also think about creating the right opportunities with the individuals we're working with. So a lot of deep conversation there. I would say that the second piece to that relationship is that it goes both ways. So Advocate is providing the roles and the opportunities, and then at Kara, we're providing some of that feedback about what is working, where do we see more opportunity to collaborate and the better experience for our talent pool. And I think one thing that has led to is being able to provide some insight around Advocate has this incredible team member success coaching program, which provides additional support to employees once they're on the job. And as they were building out that program, Kara was there to share some of our experiences and insight while you're developing that incredible program. So I'll stop there because I could just gush and I could keep going on about Advocate. I could keep talking about the partnerships we've had with JP Morgan Chase, but just to get it started, want to share some of the things that I've seen have been really important to the success of those relationships.
Great, thanks, Liana. I want to turn us a bit towards the Fair Chance hiring cohort that you and I lead. As I think about the work that we've been doing for the last 2 years with our cohort members, there are a couple of learnings that I've come up with or observed, and wanted to kind of bounce them off of the folks in the room here. And really, Liana, then get your take on them and see if you have things that you'd like to add and sort of share with our audience today. First, when I think about it, a lot of our conversations aren't just about hiring. To your point, to the point that I think Bridget made as well, it's about retaining and really growing this talent pool within an organization, making sure that companies are thinking about wraparound supports and about crafting like real career pathways for this talent pool. Another thing that comes to mind is the importance of getting buy-in. I think Matt touched on this with his early example of how Advocate got its start, and so did Nan. And it's important to have leadership buy-in, but it's also equally as important to have that operational buy-in. Who is bringing this to life within your organization? Do they believe in it as well? And then really tactically, it's about employers making an investment to follow through on this commitment, right? Dedicating the staff, the time, the bandwidth that's required to be able to really move this forward in a meaningful way. So I shared 3 of my biggest takeaways from our 2 years of cohorts, but wanted to see if you had things that you'd like to add as well.
Thanks, Steph. I think probably 2 big learnings for me is number one, just continuing to think about Fair Chance talent as all candidates being very multi-dimensional, having different barriers that we're working with or trying to make sure that we're thinking about so that they can be successful. And I raise that because sometimes we fixate on that background check process and we think if we're going to bring in more Fair Chance talent, we have to fix the background check process when there's so many other opportunities, as I think others have named here, for candidates to fall out of the process. It could be because they don't know about your job opportunities or they opt out. It could be because somewhere in the hiring process, they're not equipped for the interview, or they're trying to be able to communicate their skills, which they might not have gotten by getting a high school diploma or a 4-year degree. So there are so many moments that people can drop out of the talent funnel even before they get to the background check. So we really want to look holistically from the job seeker perspective about all the different supports that an employer might consider. So I think that's the first thing, is really taking this holistic view at your whole talent process. And then the second big takeaway I would share is, as others have mentioned, this is a long game. This requires time and investment. So we really work with a lot of employers to think about what is that right first. How do we take the first small practice change in your existing talent processes? That doesn't mean that we think small. That doesn't think we need to focus on the only the entry level opportunities or kind of limit ourselves to possibilities when we think about Fair Chance talent. But it means just what is the first step that's going to help you get there? Who do you need to bring in along the way? So for me, those are some of the takeaways that I've gotten from this experience of working with employers.
Great, thanks. And Bridget, as a member of our cohort last year, wanted to just turn to you to see what you found most valuable about being in the cohort and sort of where you're taking it from here.
Thanks, Steph. I think for me, there were many learnings that happened last year. One is that we were not alone, right? That there were other employers who were taking these similar approaches across different industries. I particularly enjoyed when you brought in, I think Kara brought in two persons who have been justice involved. One was a former law student, and one was a person who just made a bad decision very late in life. I think he was past 35, right? And had made some bad choices. And it allowed us to see that these folks could be working in very different capacities, right? They didn't necessarily only have to work in entry-level roles. They had education, they had work experience. And so looking beyond the entry level and looking beyond the non-professional roles as well for talent. Just thinking about talent and that the population itself, there's 1 in 3 people who have an arrest or a conviction record. And so those people can have many different jobs, many different backgrounds and experience. So that stuck out for me. And then I think also the sharing of best business practices. We have our design and what works for us, but it was very good for me to learn from other employers. What were their approaches? How did they train their staff? How did they ready their workforce? And then how did they support their employees once they've been hired? So all of those things were very impactful for me.
Well, thank you. Nan, I want to sort of close out the moderated questions with a question for you, putting on your Second Chance Business Coalition hat now. So you work with dozens of companies who are fair chance employers. I know this can mean different things to different companies. So as you work with these companies and engage with them, what are some of the practice changes that you're seeing these employers pursue? And sort of a add-on question for the employers who are on today's webinar, what practices should they be thinking about or prepared to change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the Second Chance Business Coalition we're about 50 large companies strong at this point. The National Basketball Association was the most recent company to join. And the reason that we're focused on large firms is because we want to try to make change at scale. And then what we're also doing is providing resources, open source resources to any company that wants to avail themselves of it. So we have a playbook for any company to be able to use to figure out where they can start and apply fair chance or second chance hiring strategies to their own firm and to their own industry. We have a partners map where you can look up to see who are some of the partners that you might be able to start working with, so you don't have to start from scratch. These are all the elements that we've been discussing, and what we try to do is to educate companies within the coalition, but then also make sure that all those resources are available to any company. I mean, the large companies and highly regulated companies have to bring those large teams together, whether it's legal or HR, compliance, talent acquisition. Everybody has to come together to get on the same page. Some other types of businesses might have more flexibility. So, but we just want to make sure that all those resources are available to get firms of any size really thinking about how they can implement this in their own work. I think another really important point, I think it's something that all companies do, and Matt touched on this earlier, is thinking about the risk, like, but also separating, real risk from perceived risk. And that is really where, the individualized assessment comes in, to think through, like, what is it in their background? Is this really going to have a bearing on the job that they're going to do? So separating that real risk versus perceived risk is something we haven't really touched on yet, but is really important. And it's something that the Second Chance Business Coalition is starting to lean in more around, which is narrative change, frankly.
Mhm.
That's why partners like, the NBA are important, because we have lots of webinars and we're talking to companies, but like the NBA goes into millions of people's living rooms every night, especially during playoffs now, and they have a lot of content around, for example, second chance hiring and clean slate, record clearing. So the opportunity to partner with both community partners, which is so essential, because we know that companies make the commitments at a national level, but the hiring happens at the local level. So the community, partnerships are really important. But then we also need to just all work on the narrative change together, and that happens at a much much broader level.
So I think with that, we can sort of open it up to the moderated Q&A portion. We've been getting questions in the chat throughout our conversation today. So I wanted to open it up with a question. Really, I think this could go to both Bridget and to Nan. As your organizations think about wraparound supports for this talent pool, can you talk a little bit about what types of supports are provided? How are they provided?
Nan, if it's okay, I'll start. I'll pass it to you. Is that okay? So part of our support of our candidates, working with Kira, they have each of the persons who are hired in, they have a job coach at Kira, and then they have access to team member success coaching through Advocate. And through there, we try to address the social determinants of health, which could be food insecurity, housing insecurity, or transportation insecurity. We try to work with the new teammate to learn if there are things that are causing them to have a potential disruption in their work, right? In their ability to get to work, or their ability to work with a clear heart and mind, right? And so if you're worried about food, or you're worried about where you're going to sleep, that means you can't be your best self at work. And so we do work with our teammates to determine if those things are a need, and then we collaborate to find resources to help mitigate those things. One of our success stories was a person who needed a place to live, and we were able to find them housing right across the street from one of our hospitals, Illinois Masonic, and they have an apartment there, and they have made their full 1 year now. So we're happy about that, right? They have housing. We have transportation that we provide temporarily through Lyft, and then long term we try to find viable solutions for our teammates as well. And then we also provide food insecurities and resources for finding food and having food for families. And we do work very closely with Kira. We meet with the hiring leaders. We meet with the sourcing persons. We meet with their job coach and our team member success coach. And we try to mitigate anything that would cause the candidate to not be successful. We have a more than 90% success rate at reaching the 1 year mark with our talent who work with the team member success coaches.
That's great. The team member success coaching program at Advocate is just such an amazing, inspiring program. We brought them into our cohort last year and again this year. to share about the work that you all are doing. And I feel like it always gets our cohort members really excited because it sets the bar so high, but in a way that seems realistic and attainable, right? Like it's just an incredible program. So thank you for sharing that and for the work that you do there. Nan, would love to hear a little bit about how JP Morgan Chase thinks about this too.
Yeah, that I mean, Bridget, that does sound like an amazing program. The first thing I should just mention is that, we typically, because of our regulatory framework, because I think I mentioned earlier that 7-year look back period, most of the folks who we're bringing on are further away from their justice system involvement than perhaps other industries. So, and one of the other things that I think, and that different companies do this differently,
Mhm.
but when that individualized assessment is done at the hiring phase, the only people who know that an individual at JP Morgan has a criminal record are the people who actually did the investigation. The hiring manager doesn't know. And so that person is, the only way we would know that someone has a record is if they self identify. And, going back to my point earlier about narrative change and, stigma, they're very, we've hired, 3,000 people with records last year. The year before it was 4,600. You know, we've hired, at this point of, fair amount of people with records, and very few people self-identify. And that just tells you, even in a company like ours, where we're out talking about this every single day of the week. And in fact, not only we also, I should mention, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, we also just launched an art installation in Philadelphia called The Waiting Workforce. And this represents 38 statues made out of expungement paper, replicas of expungement paper, to just show the weight and heft of having a criminal record. And there's a film that goes along with it where people, who have been impacted, who have had criminal records and have had trouble getting a job as a result of that, talk about their experience, their lived experience. So, even though people are a little bit, I mean, they're further away from that experience when they come to join JP Morgan Chase. That this, even though we're very supportive, people still are not really super, they want to leave it behind, I think, is probably the best way to put it. So, but in terms of what we do to support all of our employees, I should say, we have a very robust employee assistance program. Virtually everything, we have, good wages, competitive benefits, and career pathways. So when folks do join our organization, they do have, that high wage career pathway in front of them, and all of the employee assistance supports available. I think, I know hundreds of programs, like for virtually anything you could think of, is available at a company like ours.
Thank you. I think that's just sort of represents that there's no one single way to do this, right? Different companies have different approaches to this, and that they can align with what fits best with their talent pool, what fits best with business priorities and strategies. So love that you guys were able to showcase 2 different ways to do this and do it well. The next question we got, it ties into the perceived risk that people sometimes bring up when hiring this talent pool. So this is a question for Nan and for Matt. Have you heard that concern? This, it is too risky to hire folks with records into our business. How would you reply to someone who has this objection? And what have you seen actually change minds?
You can start, Nan.
I was going to let you go since I've been talking, but I think, we do hear the real risk versus the perceived risk. I think, I think you've heard me stress that when we're looking at a particular candidate, we want to make sure that they're not going to create any risk to safety and soundness, no risk to our customers or our employees. And so there is the team that I mentioned before that does all these individualized assessment. It's a dedicated team. There are consistent reviews that are applied when they're looking at a person's particular background. But I mean, I think what changes hearts and minds. I'd go back to the 1 in 3 people with records. Um, it's arithmetic. Everybody knows somebody who could use a second chance.
Yeah.
There are friends, there are neighbors, there are family members, and I think that is why, as we have more discussions about this, people will tell you things that they didn't really, because of the stigma, that they didn't want to necessarily reveal before. But we know that, virtually everyone has been, they know someone who's been touched by the justice system, and they could use a second chance. And so I think that's been the most, the issue that has really come to light and has really helped to change people's attitudes about why we need to make sure that people with records are part of our inclusive hiring strategy.
Yeah, so well said, Dan. It comes up, I would say, and Bridget, I don't know if you hear, but often in the executive sort of world of advocate, it is brought up. Is this putting us at risk? And even more, if we're doing this as a public forum today, Bridget's out there on the talking spree, she's spewing all this great updates about what advocates, I mean, we're very public about it. Is it going to jeopardize the way our patients feel about coming in for care? And the approach that we've had is we're willing to take that risk because we know it's the right thing to do. We know that the data does not suggest that it puts us at risk. We know that it follows our mission and our purpose to support a community well outside of the 4 walls of the hospitals, as we talked about early on. So it is brought up, but we have such great success stories. We also can leverage the fact that, well, Chase is doing it, so we're doing it. I mean, so there are big players in the market, and I think if folks are concerned or organizations are concerned, there's enough data and enough evidence and enough partners out there doing it and doing it well to suggest this is a movement we all need to consider.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Matt said, and I think that one of the differences, and the thing that I tried to emphasize, is that probably many organizations or companies have been hiring people, with past records. And the difference really now is companies really becoming more intentional about the way that they're going about it, as Matt said, and just making sure that, this is part of our inclusive hiring strategy as well.
Also wanted to call out a couple of things that we're noticing from among cohort members, and also that we see every day at Cara. I think when you look at the data, there's kind of 2 pieces to the story. I think one element of it is that now, thankfully, there's better research, better data coming out around risk and actually right-sizing the risk and demystifying some of historically those figures that are put out there. And I know we can share some of the research coming out of RAND that has started to right size some of the data out there on risk. I think the flip side of that is actually just understanding that this is an incredible pool of untapped talent. So there's great data out there that kind of shows the experiences of people already hiring from this talent pool that are seeing great outcomes in terms of the level of performance, retention, because we know that oftentimes this group of individuals don't get that opportunity. They're turned away so often. So once an employer opens a door, they're going to perform. They are going to stay with them. And Cara was lucky enough to do to participate in a research study with McKinsey that showed that fair chance talent is actually much more likely to go after and be selected for advancement opportunities. So we're talking about an incredible talent pool here. I think from a tactical standpoint, if you think about getting buy-in, something that we've heard, and I think that story of Jamie Dimon certainly rings true, is that, you know, a lot of these entities, your job and the job of your legal and risk folks is to think about protecting the organization, but it's really hard to see risk when you actually have these one-to-one experiences. And when you hear from individuals themselves, you get to see them as people. You get to see the potential they have, and you start to move away from this idea of the statistical risk, and you see the humans behind them and all the potential they bring. So I think we've heard a lot of similar experiences when you actually get to meet and kind of have that direct experience with Fair Chance talent. I think that alone can go a long way.
And Steph, I'd like to add one other statistical fact, right? That we've all seen is that a quality employment reduces the rate of recidivism. So when you talk about risk, it's greatly mitigated when a person has, I lost my lights in this room, when a person has employment. And so that as we think about risk and the risk to the organization, when we have quality employment for those members of our population, and they're less likely to repeat an offense. And that means everyone's living a better quality of life in that environment.
Thank you, Bridget. I cannot imagine a better point to end on. So thank you to the panelists for joining today. Thank you to our audience members. We would love for folks to learn more about the Fair Chance hiring cohort and about the Corporate Coalition more broadly. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn to stay informed about upcoming events. Liz has also put a number of resources about the coalition, as well as the Second Chance Business Coalition, JP Morgan Chase's Waiting Workforce Art Installation, Advocates Team Member Success Coaching, and an upcoming Cara Plus webinar in the chat. So lots of resources for folks who want to stay informed and stay involved. And please feel free to get in touch if you would like to be part of our work, or if you're interested in getting connected to the Second Chance Business Coalition. Thank you all so much, and we hope to see you again for a future webinar.
Thank you.